Well, I hope that whatever you are doing right now, you're outdoors, you're enjoying maybe the warmth of the sun, the beauty of God's creation, and the sweetness of his presence right now. And I wonder if you can pause perhaps and just be aware of what it is that you feel around you. Maybe it is that warmth of the sun. Maybe it's the coolness of the breeze. Maybe it's the crispness of the air. Maybe it's the beauty of your surroundings. Perhaps it's the enormity of creation or the intricacy of his creation. Well, I hope that whatever the challenges are that you are facing right now, and there are probably plenty, I hope that the presence of God's graces and his mercies outshine and overshadow those challenges to you. And so God, we just want to thank you for all that you've given us and all that we enjoy. The privileges, the love and the grace and the mercy, how lavish you are with these things. And we ask you, Lord, right now in this moment, help us to be aware. Help us to be more aware of your graces to us and your hand on us in Jesus' name. Amen. We have come to the end of our journey through Nehemiah here on Sundays. And although in your midweek city groups, you may be digging down deeply over the next couple of weeks as you begin to wrap up that together in your city groups, this, though, is our final Sunday message. And so I wonder if wherever you are right now, you could let out like an ah, like a disappointed ah, that's a shame. We're finishing it up already. But I hope that you've learned more than just some stuff about a book. Actually, the goal of Christian teaching is not just that you know something, but that you know someone and that you do something with what you know. I hope that you felt God speak. I hope that you felt God's encountering you in some way. I hope that you felt him call you to a greater sense of purpose in his kingdom. I hope that you felt him build resilience into you as you persist through the face of opposition. I hope you found him challenge you to reorder your priorities as you put aside the distractions of this world. I hope you felt him soften your hearts towards those who are disadvantaged, and that you've responded to his call to celebrate all his past faithfulness and his present graces to us. In the book of Nehemiah, we've met a man who is both a man of prayer and a man of action, a man who's a hope-filled realist and who took responsibility and followed through. We met a man who had genuine concern for other people. I mean, he is uncommonly empathetic. We also met a man who's exhibited keen foresight and discernment and decisiveness. But what about you? What did you learn? What stuck out to you? What are you taking away from this journey through Nehemiah?
For me, it was from Nehemiah 12. Starting of dedication of the wall was praise. So praise comes out from the heart of joy, of knowing and experiencing God's mercy and provision. And declaration of God's faithfulness is sustained on the spoken and promise that God has given. For God is faithful to fulfill what he has spoken.
Nehemiah, one of my all-time favourite books of the Old Testament. Nehemiah lays down the blueprint for godly project planning in building his church. Number 1, seek God's direction through prayer. Number 2, trust in him to seize opportunities as they arise. Number 3, plan ahead and make contingencies for perceived roadblocks. Number 4, share your vision with those involved. Number 5, lead with humility and grace. Number 6, recognise and respect the contribution of others. Number 7, celebrate with the team when objectives are realised. And number 8, give thanks to him when the vision is complete.
Hi, it's Gail Dean here. The chapter of Nehemiah that stands out the most to me and I think has impacted me the most as we've worked our way through this amazing book has been chapter 8, where the wall is built and the people come together, where they praise, where they're just so thrilled to be together and in the presence of God and with each other and learning from the book of the law. And it really is a description of revival. It's very emotional, it's very exciting, and in these times when kind of things can be a little flat in our lives, and maybe for me, it's my faith is not as alive as it could be. It's wonderful to read about our brothers and sisters thousands of years ago who gathered round God and were so excited to be together again, to be with him and to be learning what he wanted them to learn so that they could live his way.
I've been super encouraged by Nehemiah's prayerfulness and action. And it's not even just a pray then act, waiting for the exact words from God, but there's a closeness of relationship and he knows what's important.
We read about Nehemiah as a cupbearer to the king. He goes to the king with this request, this infliction on his heart that he wants to go and rebuild the wall. A bit of a career change. And when he goes to the king, he asks the king for what he wants, his requests are granted. Actually, at the time when we read that verse, I too have had a career change. It has been through this entire journey that we've been reading Nehemiah that I've been going through this journey as well. And all I can say is God is good and God is great, and he came through for me like he did for Nehemiah.
Something that I've learned from the Nehemiah series is to be intentional with my time, not letting life distract me from spending time with God, and to face every challenge in prayer before action.
I've really appreciated having a bit of a bird's eye view through Nehemiah on how God works to grow his people and take them through a spiritual journey, I think, because in the unfolding of our day-to-day stories, we can kind of get caught up in the just success or failure of any given moment. It just seems to me that it's not the events that matter so much as like God is using those to shape his people.
While the book of Nehemiah bears the name of one man, I have adored that the book is about a nation. And it is about the men, the women, and the children of that nation coming together to rebuild something for God's glory, coming together with skills they knew they had and skills they didn't even know they had. They become builders, they become guards. There's the merchant beside the goldsmith. I just love in chapter 2 that list of this person beside this person and this brick here. They're able to point to it and say, my family, my tribe, my hands built that. So it's a pretty significant wall, and who knows what we're building and what God will do with it.
Well, over the last few weeks, we've seen Ezra and Nehemiah combined forces to bring spiritual renewal to the people. A couple of Sundays ago, we saw how they gathered together, all the exiles together for a festival. They read from the Torah, that's God's law, his word, to all the people for 7 days. And then they celebrated the Feast of the Tabernacles. They remembered God's faithfulness to them from the time of the Exodus and the wilderness journeys. They offered like this big confession of sins. They vowed to renew their covenant and to follow God's commands. And then they finished, as Boris preached to us from so brilliantly last week, with this great celebration over the temple and the completed walls of Jerusalem. And as Boris said, like we as the people of God in 21st century Sydney, we as Church for the City can look back over our recent history over the last year or so and say, wow, like look what God has done among us. Look where he has brought us from. You know, we had this season where we got forced into house churches, but actually during that season, God built deep, real, resilient and meaningful relationships among us. And then as we were able to get out, we were able to be a blessing to our city and to the city around us in a variety of different ways. Then when we were able to gather together at the Doherty Centre, he put us together as a community. He added to us. People were grafted in. We saw people serving one another and loving one another, and he strengthened us through that whole season as well. And because of that strengthening, we're able to step out as an autonomous church now. We announced our new name, Church for the City, last week. Thank you, by the way, for the encouraging feedback we received during this week. You know, God is moving us forward in a season where it feels like the current of our circumstances would otherwise be forcing us back downstream. In a season where the current of our circumstances would be forcing us backwards, God is moving us forward. And a little bit like the people of God in Nehemiah's time, we can say, well, all things considered, we're doing okay. But here today, in this last chapter of Nehemiah, how is the story going to finish for these people of God? How does this book end? Well, as Boris said to us last week, they had this great celebration over the temple and the completed walls of the city of Jerusalem. And we're wondering, like, could this be the climax? Could this be the high point, the turning point for the people of God? But it's not. Like, bizarrely, the book ends on this pretty big downer. It's this massive anticlimax. Nehemiah, he goes on this tour in chapter 13 around the city, and he finds that the people of God are not fulfilling their vows, their covenant vows. He sees that Zerubbabel's work. Do you remember him? He's the guy who helped restore the temple, spent decades doing it before Nehemiah arrived on the scene. He sees that actually Zerubbabel's work has been undone. He finds the temple being neglected and being staffed by all sorts of unqualified people, including, by the way, Tobiah, one of the three villains that we met earlier in the book of Nehemiah. He's one of the guys who's staffing the temple. Nehemiah also discovers that, like, Ezra's work is being compromised. Ezra brought the law back to the people of God, but actually, like, he finds that everybody's violating God's law. They're intermarrying, they're working on the Sabbath, and actually, even like Nehemiah's own work on the walls is involved as well, because like people are setting up markets around the walls and working on the Sabbath. The wheels are falling off this thing. And in a sense, understandably, Nehemiah goes on this rampage. He starts beating people up, ripping out their hair and yelling, hey, you got to obey the commands of God. He goes postal on them. And on one hand, like, he's trying to restore righteousness. He's exercising some discipline. He's insisting on purity in the temple. He's bringing some structures back to the people of God again. And in a sense, it's admirable. In a sense, it's part of the mark of a restoring leader. But in another way, actually, like, it is this frightening display of abusive leadership. Like, in today's culture, like, that would not be tolerated. It might be tolerated somewhere. It is not tolerated here. We will not tolerate abusive leadership here. And then, like, the whole chapter ends with Nehemiah's final words, which are basically, God, would you remember me? And then I tried my best. And then the chapter ends and the book ends. And it's like, maybe wherever you are right now, maybe you could do that. Like really, like, what a buzzkill. I remember reading through Nehemiah like 6 months ago. And as I read through the different chapters, I was like, wow, there's some incredible themes in here. It really feels like God's highlighting some stuff that he wants to say to us as a community. And then I got to the end, to chapter 13, and I was like, what? That's how it finishes? Like, what a massive anticlimax. What are we meant to do with that? It's a total buzzkill. In the history of like Christian revivals, almost every great move of God has spun off some really unhealthy downsides. Almost every great move of God is littered with disappointments and setbacks and people running off in unhealthy directions. And another way to say it is that any progress of the kingdom is going to be confronted by enemy attack. And that's part of like the mystery of God. And as the people of God, we've got to be okay with mystery, with not understanding why everything happens the way that it happens. And we need to be okay with living in this tension of the now and the not yet, in that God's kingdom has come and it's still coming. That we reign in life and we're learning to reign in life. That we're victorious and we are being brought into victory. That we know and are discovering the joy of the Lord as our strength. That something can be remarkably fruitful and tragically toxic at the same time. If we even think back to the early days of the New Testament, when like revival was breaking out, it was the very heyday of church growth. And we see the story about Ananias and Sapphira from chapter 5 of Acts, where these two, Ananias and Sapphira, they wanted the reputation of holiness and generosity without actually wanting to be holy and generous. You can check that story out. It's tragic. They lie to the church. They're deceitful before God, and heavy judgment falls on them. And this is right back in the early days of New Testament revival. And so as we look at history itself and Christian revivals throughout it, as we look at the New Testament, it kind of makes sense to us that the book of Nehemiah will finish in this kind of anticlimactic fashion. There are some absolutely glorious moments throughout this book, and we've experienced and we've enjoyed some of those over recent months. But there's also this brutal realism to the way the book ends up. Glorious moments, but brutal realism. There's some triumph, but yet tragedy. Success, and yet failure. Progress, and yet opposition. We haven't necessarily been explicit about what the walls represent to us as 21st century Christians in Sydney, Australia. You know, there is a sense where God has been doing a rebuilding work among us as a church. And 1 Peter 2 does talk about us being living stones being built together. And God has been doing a rebuilding work among us. But like in another respect, we've also been called to rebuild the city. Actually, we've been called to join God in the renewal of all things, reaching out to those around us with love and seeing the city built up in hope and faith, brick by brick. It might be much more personal for you than that. Maybe you've considered areas of your own lives that have been broken down, that are in disrepair, that are in ruins and need to be restored. And so whether it be your own life or the city or the church itself, whatever the wall has been for you, wherever there is kingdom progress, we can expect enemy opposition. And it's part of the reason, by the way, that we're going to be looking in a few weeks' time at the theme of suffering. Actually, next we're going to be looking at this little mini-series called Spring Scriptures, fresh messages from some fresh voices among us as a church family. But then we're going to be looking at the theme of suffering over a few weeks' time. Not because it's the most alluring of topics, but because Jesus did say in John 16, in this world you will have trouble. And we are facing trouble. And we need to know as Christians, how do we face the trouble that the world brings? Because I know that there are setbacks. I know that there are challenges. I know that there is opposition. And I don't know what all those challenges are for you, but I do know that we are all facing them in different ways. And what this final chapter of Nehemiah, what Nehemiah 13 shows us is that for all the renovation and the social reform, there was still this deeper work that was required. Jesus still needed to come. You know, Zerubbabel and Ezra and Nehemiah, they had all labored, they had all worked hard, but social reform wasn't enough. We need the renewal of our hearts. And friends, the great news for us is that is what Jesus came to do. And while the people of God in Nehemiah's time, they looked forward, they anticipated the coming of Christ, we are on the other side of Christ's arrival and his death and burial and resurrection. We're on the other side of the cross. What they looked forward to, what their hearts longed for, we get to enjoy and experience as a reality, or at the very least, we should enjoy and experience it as a reality. Yeah, Jesus is the climax. He's the climax of history. The walls being built weren't the climax. Jesus is the climax. And as much as we love being a part of Church for the City with you, like friends, we never want to preach the church and its progress. We always want to preach Christ and him crucified. He is the climax. He is the high point. He was the turning point of all of human history. No amount of renovation or social reform, even among us as a community, is going to cut it. And you might feel like that's totally underwhelming, like that's a massive buzzkill. Here's the thing though, I think that sometimes we can become too aware of buzzkills and of challenges that we aren't aware enough of God's graces and mercies to us and how actually they outshadow and outshine and outweigh all the challenges we might be facing. Because whatever challenge you are facing right now, in the person of Jesus, your greatest need has been fulfilled in his death, burial, and resurrection. That whatever the pain that you are enduring right now, that in Jesus, in him, you have somebody who totally gets it, who suffered just like you have, and to an even greater extent, he identifies with you in your pain and he is present with you in the midst of it. That whatever deficit you might be feeling right now. Maybe it's a physical deficit, emotional, a mental, a financial, a relational deficit. Whatever deficit you feel, we have a God who promises to fulfill our every need. And whatever burden you feel like you are carrying, we have a God who says to us, come to me, all who are weary, all who are burdened, to all who are heavy laden, and I will give you rest for your souls. Like, bring me that burden, lay it at the foot of the cross. Let me carry that load for you. And friends, what we need to do is fix our eyes on Jesus. And I realize that for some of you, that might feel like, what does that even mean? How do I do that? I know we say that, but what does it really mean to fix our eyes on Jesus? Well, I think at the very least, it means recognizing who he is. It means recalling all that he has done, like those things I just mentioned. And it's about turning our mind and our heart and the attention of our mind and our heart towards him. And maybe that's something that you struggle to do normally on a Sunday when we encourage each other to fix our eyes on Jesus. Maybe whether it's on a Sunday Zoom while you're in your lounge room during this lockdown period, or maybe even when we're at the Doherty Centre together and we say, let's fix our eyes. It's something that you struggle to do, but perhaps right now, wherever you are, and hopefully you're outside enjoying the sun right now, the change of pace and the change of place can help you do just that, to fix your eyes on Jesus. I want to call you to let go and to let God. To let go of that burden, to release that pain, to hand over that worry, to let God deal with it, and to replace it with hope, life, and faith. So in this moment of stillness that you're experiencing hopefully right now, whatever maybe is in your mind right now, whether it's the presence of pain, the worry of work, the anxiety about the future, some shame from the past, or even guilt in the present, Jesus said, come to me, all who are weary, all who are burdened, heavy laden. Bring those things to me. Let go of them. Receive my grace afresh. Receive my spirit afresh, and find rest for your soul.